thank you for tuning in. This is Moving to Canada's live stream on COVID-19 and Canadian immigration. We are joined today by the wonderful Anthony Doherty, a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, one of the partners of Doherty Fultz Immigration, a consultancy based here in Canada. Really expert professionals at providing guidance when it comes to Canadian immigration. So we're going to be covering a ton of stuff today. We're essentially going to go through each of Canada's immigration programs and give an update as far as what we know is happening in that program related to Canadian immigration. So just to give you guys a little bit of a preview of our agenda, we're going to start with the travel restrictions. The borders to Canada remain closed to the vast majority of people, so we're going to go through the restrictions, who can enter and who cannot. We're going to cover some of the temporary immigration measures that are in place to help people who are impacted by COVID-19. And then we're going to do immigration program changes. So we're going to do some general updates that IRC's introduced. We're going to cover express entry, then IEC, International Experience Canada, that includes the working holiday program. We're going to talk about some other types of work permits that have been impacted. We're going to do quick updates on family sponsorship, study permits, and then people looking to visit Canada, so visitors or TRV applicants. If you tuned in last time, you may remember that we ended off with a question period where we let everybody ask their questions. We decided to shake things up a little bit this time around, and instead we're going to be taking your questions throughout. So if you do have questions, feel free to write them into the chat. I'm following along on my phone right here. So write your questions into the chat. We'll do our best to answer them, but we do ask that you ask questions about the program that we're discussing. If you have express entry questions, wait till we get to the express entry time and then ask your questions. That will help us just maintain a good flow and keep everything on track so we can get through as much as possible. Great. So I've also taken the liberty of going through, we had our Facebook event up, and we know a ton of you, I think we had more than 50 questions come in to our Facebook event beforehand. So I've gone through and I've added some of those questions in here, so we'll address those questions as we're going through as well. Thank you so much to those of you who submitted your questions in advance. Great. So how are you feeling, Anthony? You ready to...
I'm good to go, Dane. Good to go. Let's get these questions answered.
Let's get these questions answered. Let's learn about immigration. Okay, so we're going to start with COVID travel restrictions.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, most foreign nationals at this point in time are still banned from entering Canada. There are two separate legal orders that are in place right now banning the entry of foreign nationals. One order is banning entry from the United States. That is technically in effect until July 21st, although we had news come out this morning that it is going to be extended to August 21st. We haven't had the Canadian government update their webpage yet, but we've heard it reported in multiple media outlets as well. We have a second order banning travel from all other countries except the United States, and that is in place until at least July 31st. Both of those orders are constantly being negotiated and renegotiated. There's no guarantee that they will lift once we hit those expiration dates. They very well may continue to be extended. But within those orders, there are certain exemptions. So, Anthony, could you talk us through the exemptions? Who is able to travel to Canada at this time?
Okay, so we'll start off with visiting Canada. Okay, so anyone who is a family member of a Canadian permanent resident or a Canadian citizen can travel to Canada to reunite with their family member. Anyone who is a family member of a temporary resident can travel to Canada. However, they must contact IRCC for permission to do so. There's a specific email address on the website that you contact if you are the immediate family person of a who is temporarily in Canada. Okay. that is about it for visitors. So we'll move on to students. So anyone who was issued a study permit or a study permit approval prior to March 18th can currently travel. They're exempt from the travel restrictions and they can currently travel to Canada. Unfortunately, anyone whose study permit was issued after March 18th or was approved after March 18th, they're not exempt from the travel restrictions. We'll go on to, I think we're going to go into a lot more depth in students later
We
on.
will.
Yeah. So then workers. Workers there's a lot more criteria.
Yeah.
So in regards to, so you must, if you've got a work permit and it was issued before March 18th, you can travel to Canada. Okay. If you had an application approved for a work permit and you have a job offer in Canada that has not been affected by the impact, that is up and running in as normal operations, you can travel to Canada. Okay. Do you want to take over the IEC?
Yeah, I'll briefly mention IEC here, though we'll be doing a pretty robust conversation about IEC later on. So International Experience Canada, this includes the Working Holiday Program. IEC work permit holders, if you were approved and you received your POE letter and you have not yet activated your work permit, you can still do so, provided that you have proof that you have a job offer in Canada. So you can still travel to Canada and activate your work permit if you have a job offer. Now, if you've already activated your IEC work permit and you've left the country, you can come back to Canada just with that activated work permit, but you may be asked to prove that you had only left the country temporarily. So you might have to prove that you still have a family connection or an apartment or a job available for you in Canada. We have heard occasionally people being refused entry with an activated work permit an activated IEC work permit if they can't show that they had left temporarily.
And then finally, anyone who has a job offer in an essential service, they can make an application for a work permit online, and they can apply to have that process sped up, basically, to get them into Canada as quickly as possible to issue them the work permit.
Yeah. And I'm just going to address a question here I see coming from Olivia. Olivia is asking, what information do we need to have on the job offer document? Regarding IEC, we've heard in our Facebook forum that we manage a lot of people talking about the job offers they've brought. And the job offers that people have shown to border officials, they range anywhere from a full contract to an email. So it doesn't have to be that robust. But again, it's going to come down to the discretion of the border officer with whom you end up dealing. So the more details that you can have, the better. But we have heard situations where people have gotten through with just, an email confirming the job offer.
It's probably beneficial if they can have their employer state on the letter that the business is up and running normal services and has not been directly impacted by COVID-19. That will probably make the process go a lot smoother at the port of entry.
That's great. Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. So other travel restrictions, I think we got through most of them here.
Visitors, study permit, work permit.
Yeah.
We've covered the three temporary. Obviously, it goes without saying, obviously, permanent residents and Canadian citizens are obviously exempt from travel restrictions. That goes without saying.
Yeah, and there are a handful of other exemptions in place, of course, for things like, air crews, diplomats, consulate-approved family reunification. There's a number of very rare exceptions. We're not going to go into detail about those there, but if you think you might qualify for one of those, you can check the IRCC website.
Sorry, we didn't mention, well, again, we're going to talk about it later on. COPRs issued prior to March 18th. We didn't mention them. So you can come to Canada. They're very specific on this. You can come to Canada if you are immigrating to Canada. You can't just come on your even if your COPR was issued prior to March 18th, you can't just come to activate your permanent residency and leave. That cannot be your intention. Your intention must to come and reside in Canada.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point there. And I think a lot of people call that a soft landing. They're soft landing
Soft
to
landing.
activate the PR. So if you do think that you qualify for an exemption and you want to travel to Canada right now, there are a few other things that you should keep in mind. So what will happen to you and what do you need to prepare for if you're traveling to Canada? Make sure that you're bringing the documents that prove your immigration status, whatever status that qualifies you for that exemption is. And it can help to actually print off the IRCC regulations that approve your exemptions, that you can show that to airline officials and border officers. The travel restrictions and the exemptions have sort of settled now, so most people are on the same playing field when it comes to approvals, but it can still help to have that documentation. Now, a couple of mandatory things that you're going to need are your isolation plan. It is currently legally required if you come to Canada, no matter what your status is or where you're coming from. If you're coming from outside the country, you have to isolate for 14 days. Okay, so you're going to be asked to show that you have a plan for how you're going to accomplish that self-isolation. If you're looking for details about that, there are some on our website, for which there's a link in the description of this video. You can also pop onto our YouTube channel, Moving to Canada, and check out Anthony and my previous live stream from April for more details on the isolation plan. Currently, it's also required that you wear a mask if you are on the plane, as well as in transit to your destination. Okay, so you're going to need to wear a mask. And finally, if you have any symptoms, I'm laughing because this should go without saying. If you have any symptoms of COVID-19, do not travel. They will turn you away. It doesn't matter what your status is, they won't let you travel.
Exactly.
Yeah, but also just don't risk public health, guys. We all want to get through this.
So can I just add something to that, Dane? I had someone the other day say to me that they came in through the airport and they were processed through. And they said to me, "Oh, they didn't tell me to quarantine for 14 days. I wasn't given an order to do so." So I just want to it doesn't matter if they tell you to do so or do not tell you to do so. You must quarantine for 14 days. There's no choice in the matter.
It's also, the Quarantine Act is in effect right now, and I believe, if I am not mistaken, they can charge you up to $750,000 or 6 years in prison if you do not isolate. So
whether you're told to do so or not told to do so, you must do so. That is, and it's the law, as you said.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions from our Facebook group that I prepared about the travel restrictions. So I'm going to field these to you, Anthony, but starting off with a question from Emily. Emily's common law partner had gained an SIMP nomination by getting a job offer and accepting it. So my understanding is that their common law partner is coming to Canada on a work permit to work in that job. Does this mean that Emily can also travel with him, as it's not her who has the accepted job offer, it's just her common law partner?
Okay, so there's a lot of answers to this question. Okay, and I will do my best to answer it, but without having all of the detail, because different variables can change the question completely. So if our partner's job offer and has received a nomination from the SIMP, if they are not currently in Canada, I'm assuming from the question they're not in Canada, because
that's what it sounds like. Yeah,
right, it's travel. So anyone doesn't matter where you're from, you cannot make an application for a work permit at the port of entry. So let's say you're from a TRV exempt country where you don't require a visa to come to Canada. Normally, pre-COVID, you could, in most situations, you could make an application for a work permit at the port of entry. So just what I'm trying to basically state here is, just because you have a job offer doesn't mean you can come to Canada. You need to apply for your work permit online. That's number one. Okay. Number two, yes, if they meet the definition of a common law couple, they've been residing in a conjugal relationship for 12 months or more at the same together, then again, it depends on if the occupation is, if her common law partner's occupation falls under a NOC 0, A, or B, then then basically she can apply for an open work permit because she's the family member of a skilled worker in Canada. Again, variables. A lot of the PMP support letters will also, or the majority, all of them, I believe, will support uh, the work permit letter. They'll also support the open work permit for the family member, even if it's C and D. So I hope that answers your question as best as I can without knowing more.
You definitely do have some options there, Emily. And I'm going to take this moment to just plug Anthony's services. As you can see, if you have hyper specific questions about your personal situation, there can be a lot of variables at play, and you may actually have quite a few options on the table for you. We, of course, can't go into that detailed level of personal guidance during this live stream. But if you are interested, you can always book a consultation with Anthony, with Doherty Fultz Immigration. This is I'm just showing off your website right here. You can book a consultation, and there is also a link to book a consultation in the description of this video. We've got another.
Sorry. No, just going back on the consultations, because in the consultations, someone will ask a question, because it is a great question.
Yeah.
But someone will ask a question like that, and our job in the consultation is to break the question down. You know, what kind of job is it? What is the province that you got the nomination from? We then break down. We ensure that you meet the definition. You know, when did you move in together? So that's the benefit of the consultation, where we really break down the questions so that we can give you the right answer.
Right. Great. And I had another question. I just saw a question come in from Holly, who is asking who is classed as family members. So I'm going to show off our the Moving to Canada website here. If you are looking for the detailed information and the most up-to-date information about the travel restrictions, head to the Moving to Canada website. We've got a page that we update all the time with information about who is exempt from the travel restrictions. So you can see here that we've got all of that info here, as well as which relatives are exempt. So we've got spouses, common law partners, dependent children of dependent children, parents, and guardians. And I think I've actually lost Anthony here, so I'm just going to give him a quick call back. Okay, I'm going to work on that. In the meantime, I will jump on to our next question here. Oh, yes, of course, my Skype application has frozen. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a moment for my Skype to relaunch, but I'll jump into our next question. This came from Rob on the Facebook discussion. Me and my girlfriend are traveling to Toronto on the 13th of August from Manchester Airport. I have a job offer for when I arrive. However, my girlfriend hasn't yet, so she doesn't yet have a job offer. She gets replies from companies saying, please contact us when you arrive in the country and we will progress your application further. Hello, Anthony. Sorry, I lost you there for a second, but you're back now.
No, it's okay.
So I'm just reading through the question we got from Rob about his girlfriend who hasn't been able to get a job offer yet. So Rob says the companies aren't willing to send her a job offer letter, but are willing to offer a job when they arrive. So Rob was first asking, do all companies understand the current rules? I'll answer that. No, all companies in Canada do not understand the Canadian immigration rules and Canadian travel restrictions. It may help if you can explain to the companies that you need the written job offer in order to travel to Canada. As well, Rob is asking, would an immigration officer turn them around and refuse them entry? Could you answer that question for us there, Anthony?
Well, yeah, so it's very similar. The answer is very similar to the question before. As I said, Rob has a job offer, but his girlfriend does not have a job offer as of yet. Okay, so if they don't meet the definition of a common law couple or spouse or conjugal partners, then she will need a job offer unless she's eligible for an open work permit through something like the IEC. I don't think it says where they're from, maybe the UK.
Yeah.
So, because if she was a family member, then obviously we're back to the family member of a foreign worker working in a NOC 0 A or B position. As far as Rob's concerned, the company must send him the offer. Again, he must make an application online. He can't come to the point. He would be able to if you were from the UK to make an application for a work permit. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
I think so. And I'll just jump back to one of the exemptions to travel restrictions that we mentioned earlier, exemptions for family members of temporary residents. If you are in Canada temporarily on a study permit or a work permit and you have a spouse or partner, they can write to IRCC and ask for that written authorization to travel to Canada temporarily. And so that's also an option based on the current travel restrictions.
Yeah, 100%.
And I see Safant is asking here, there's a job offer that wants to have an interview with me. Can I enter if I have a letter from the company stating that I'm applying for a position? Under the current stated travel restrictions on the IRCC website, no. You have to demonstrate that you do have an actual job offer. Okay?
Correct.
Great. So I think we're ready to jump into some of the Canadian immigration program updates. So we're going to move on from the travel restrictions here. So I've got a couple of questions here that we'll go through. I'm going to start off with fielding this one to you, Anthony. Is Canada still processing applications for immigration?
Yes, they are. They are. To the best of their ability.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously COVID-19 has severely impacted processing times in all areas of immigration, not just PR. But no, the answer to that question is yes, they are still processing express entry, they're still processing family sponsorship, study permits, work permits, and so on. Right. But expect serious delays.
Major
delays.
Everything.
And I'll add to that too, when you're looking up, obviously we all know before COVID, 80% of all express entry applications were processed, or that was the goal, is to process them within 6 months. Okay, we can't hold them to that now. It's impossible.
Yeah.
There's going to be, so I doubt that there'll be very many applications that will be processed within 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking on the processing times too, say for instance you're looking up a work permit extension processing time or study permit or visitor record or visa, it clearly states yes to give you the processing time, but it clearly states that may not be accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've said that I think everything on their website is, as far as processing times are concerned, is inaccurate at this point. They're just, I mean, and honestly, you have to have some compassion for IRCC. This is such an unprecedented situation, and I think they've done a decent job of responding to this very complex public health crisis and the complex immigration needs that it's presented. But I think it's going to be a while before we get things back to normal.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that. No, and as I said, fair play to them, actually. I'll take my hat off to IRCC. They are, even though they're maintaining to process express entry and family sponsorship and the other temporary applications, obviously a lot of their department is focused on the essential workers, the things that are, helping us get through COVID-19. So they are doing a great job, and fair play to them.
Yeah. I did want to talk about a couple of programs that had been or continue to be completely paused at this point in time. So we saw at the beginning of the health crisis, when travel restrictions went into effect, Canada paused visitor visa and ETA applications. They've actually restarted processing for that as of July 1st. But they've made it very clear on their website that that's mostly to avoid having a backlog of, these thousands and thousands of visitor visa applications once COVID is over. So they're processing them, but they've stated that just because you receive an approved visitor visa, it does not mean you can travel to Canada. You have to check the travel restrictions, and the vast majority of visitors are not able to enter the country at this time.
I'll just add to
Mm-hmm.
that, Dane, as well. Uh, if, let's say, for ETA, if you apply for an ETA, and what usually is within 24 to 48 hours if you don't fall out for a manual review, uh, as you said, if you're not exempt from the travel restrictions, you can't come to Canada. So, but if you do get your ETA, you can come to Canada as long as you can prove you meet the
Right.
exemptions. Onto the TRV, which is slightly more complicated, as they are continuing to processing them. If you meet the definition, if you are exempt from the travel restrictions, you can contact them to have your TRV expedited.
Hmm.
That's the TRVs that they're focusing on right now, is the ones, the essential travel
Okay.
and the exemptions. So you can contact them.
Great. And the other program that I wanted to mention was IEC, International Experience Canada. That remains paused. No applications are being processed. No invitations are being issued. And we'll go into a bit more detail about that later, but just as far as processing updates are concerned. Biometrics. I actually received an update just before we started. I meant to bring this up with you, Anthony, and then totally forgot. But I'm gonna pull up the IRCC website here. So IRCC has just announced a biometrics exemption for temporary residence applicants in Canada. So I'm just going to read this straight off the website because I got this update about 5 minutes before we started this. So IRCC is stating, as a temporary measure, you're exempt from giving biometrics if you're applying from within Canada, to extend your stay as a student, worker, or visitor, to restore your status as a student, worker, or visitor, if you're applying for a work or study permit, for a visitor visa, or for a temporary resident permit. This does not so you do still have to submit your biometrics if you're a PR applicant, but they are allowing an extension of the biometrics deadline, so no application will be refused or closed if you aren't able to give your biometrics within the period indicated.
That doesn't surprise me. They had to do something like this because the biometrics were holding processing back.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you were given 90 days in the beginning, and then they would extend the 90 days again and again until. So that'll probably coincide with this week too. They've radically reduced the processing times in some of the temporary in Canada. So I can give you the times as of today.
Yeah.
So a work permit extension and initial work permit made within Canada is now 68 days. So that's down approximately 30, 40 days.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Study permit extension, which again was up around 100, forgive me for not knowing the right figure, that has been reduced to 66 days as of now. Visitor extension remains the same, 127 days, give or take.
Okay.
So that's quite especially for the work permit extensions initial and the study permit extensions. That's a significant drop in processing times.
Mm-hmm. And Anthony, for people who want to complete their biometrics but they are outside Canada at this time, can you give a little update on the situation there?
Yeah, you basically, if you're outside of Canada, you're usually required to give your biometrics at a VAC, Visa Application Center. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to contact your local, go online to see where and the contact information for your local visa application center, and see if they're open and see if they're doing biometrics. If they are, you book an appointment. You'll need your biometrics request letter. But then, unfortunately, for some people, their closest VAC might not be open, the Visa Application Center. However, you're not tied to your local one. You can go to, maybe there's a city a couple of hours away with the visa application that's open. You can travel to there to give your biometrics as long as they're open and accepting biometrics.
Okay, I didn't know that actually. Interesting. And let me see if I can pull up the IRCC website here just to show off their list of visa application centers. Here we go. So if you just Google IRCC VAC, you'll find this information. You'll see some VACs, as Anthony mentioned, are opening now. And there's a list here where you can look up the VACs for your country or region. And you'll see a lot of them are open, but they all state open with limited services. So it's also best to check what services are being offered.
Another question we're getting a lot
Yeah.
of too is, for some reason, when you submit a temporary application online, within 24 hours, sometimes a couple of days, you'll receive the biometrics request letter.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, for some reason, they were unable to, for technical reasons, they were unable to change the 30 days. So a lot of people are getting biometrics request letters, and it says you must give your biometrics within 30 days, and they get worried because it's impossible to meet that deadline. So I just want to basically clarify that even though that if it does say 30 days, it's actually 90 days until ICCRC says
Right.
otherwise. And if you're unable due to COVID-19 to give your biometrics within 90 days, they'll extend that by.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Um, And I've got a question here that we received on Facebook from Nikith asking any idea when IRCC will start rolling out COPRs for, applications where essentially everything, all parts of the application have been passed. So I can provide a bit of an update there this is based on anecdotal information. So we run a big Facebook group. We've got about 140,000 members on there discussing their Canadian PR. What we've seen is that applications for permanent residents that have been submitted from inside Canada are still being processed and are still being approved at this point in time. For people outside Canada, we believe they're still being processed, but we haven't seen anyone receiving their passport requests lately. That's not to say that that's not happening, but it might be happening to a small volume, or they might be very, very slowly reintroducing that. But at this point, someone who receives their COPR from outside Canada cannot travel to Canada due to that March 18th travel restriction. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to issue COPRs as well. A lot of VACs aren't open to process those final applications, so or to process the passport request. So we see inside Canada, COPRs are still happening. Outside Canada, we haven't seen a lot of movement on that, but it's possible it could restart soon.
I'll just add to that too. So normally the process pre-COVID-19, when someone received their COPR, if the person was outside of Canada, they would travel to Canada, and whatever port of entry they would land at or travel through, that they were processed there as a permanent resident. Whenever someone was in Canada and received a COPR, usually from Ottawa, they would have two options. They would either leave Canada and then re-enter again and be processed as a permanent resident, or they would contact IRCC and request or book a landing appointment where you wouldn't need to leave Canada. You would get an appointment for your local CIC office, where they would land you at that office as a permanent resident without having to leave Canada. So now they've created, because of COVID-19, they've actually created a new landing process for people who are in Canada at the time their application for PR is approved. So instead of Ottawa requesting the passport, like normally Ottawa would request a passport, you send the passport to either a copy or the original, depending on whether you're TRV exempt, and you would send that to Ottawa, and they would send you back the passport with the COPR. Now you just receive a lot of our clients are just receiving a letter saying, "Dear Dane, congratulations, you are now a permanent resident of Canada." So they've automatically landed you. Okay. So there is no COPR. They do request that whenever you're able to do so, that you send them one photograph for the permanent residency card purposes, whenever you're able to do so. In the meantime as well, for 1 year, that document will act as your, because usually your status is your COPR, your landing after it's signed, or your permanent residency card. But this letter is going to act for 1 year, will act as proof as your permanent residency status. So you can actually take this letter or email Service Canada if they're not open with this letter for your social insurance number. So it's just a way to keep people in Canada without, to land them without them having to do anything, which is pretty good actually.
Great.
But let me reiterate, only for people who are in Canada.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. They've implemented some pretty substantial measures quite quickly. I want to see if we can quick fire our way through a couple of audience questions. So let's maybe ping pong back and forth here. Mark is asking us, I'm planning to visit Toronto, flying from Ireland on September 20th. At that stage, can I enter the country without quarantine? Mark, we don't know what the restrictions will be like in September. I think it's probably unlikely that they will lift the quarantine requirement before that date, but we honestly don't know. Again, I'm going to suggest that you follow the COVID travel restrictions updates on our website. I'll just pull it up here. See this, travel to Canada and coronavirus. So follow that. That's where we'll be posting the latest information about travel restrictions. You'll have to check closer to the date of travel, but if you came right now, you would absolutely have to quarantine. Okay, next
100%.
question. Reet, can international students with online classes come to Canada if their visas are stamped before March 18th? Anthony?
So the visa, it's just, so obviously it's nothing to do with the visa. The visa is just what allows you to travel to Canada.
Right.
So the rule is that the study permit, you must have been issued the study permit prior to March 18th, or your study permit was approved before March 18th.
Great.
So it's got nothing to do with the visa.
Okay, but yes, if you were approved for your study permit or you had been issued your study permit prior to March 18th, you do qualify for one of the exemptions to travel restrictions.
Correct.
So you can travel at this time. Maureen is asking for those in the last stage of citizenship applications waiting for the invitation for their citizenship oath-taking ceremony. How likely is it that this will take place at this stage of the pandemic? Are they moving?
So that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I would have completely forgot to bring that up. One of our clients last week did their oath via Zoom.
Whoa, Zoom citizenship.
Zoom citizenship, yeah, just last week. So congratulations to that person if you're watching. But yeah, so obviously this will be a slow process. There's been a pile up of people who have been approved for citizenship, and they're just basically waiting on their oath date. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more of these Zoom. We'll call it Zoom citizenship. It sounds pretty cool, actually. But yeah, you take your oath and. You signed the document in front of them, and apparently you held it up to the screen. So, and there was multiple people. It was you, and I believe 2 other professionals in the Zoom meeting. So it was pretty cool. So hopefully you get one of those emails with a Zoom appointment.
That's very cool. They should start doing Zoom biometrics. No, that sounds too complicated. Okay. Speaking of biometrics, Grant asked us, when do you need to submit your biometrics for PR? Grant says they're in the middle of the PR application but haven't been asked for biometrics, but they've been asked to pay a biometrics fee.
Right. Okay. So yeah, when they brought the biometrics into people who had submitted a PR application, say for express entry, that was submitted prior to the when they implemented biometrics for the permanent residency for, sorry, forgive me for not knowing the date. They were not exempt. So whether you had a PR application submitted before the requirement for biometrics or after, you still need to give biometrics. Going back to it, when you received that letter, for permanent residency right now in Canada, you just have to wait. If you're in Canada, you have to wait for the Service Canada centres to reopen. But as what you said there, Dane, IRCC have made that a lot easier now, because if they've taken away the need for all of the temporary applicants to do biometrics, that means that when the appointment centres do reopen, hopefully it'll just be the permanent residents that are being given the appointments. Right. So it should be, but with no way of knowing when Service Canada will resume those operations.
And just to clarify here, Anthony, for express entry, at what point in the process will you receive that biometrics letter?
It's usually, in my experience, it's a day later. It's an automatic process.
But it's after you submit your PR application.
My apologies. So obviously you receive an invitation to apply. You submit an application for permanent residency and pay your government fees. And then within 1 to 2 days, you'll receive a letter in your MyCIC account requesting that you give biometrics.
Right. Okay, great. Let's see. We've got some more questions. Che had a question about visitor visas. Is a visitor visa possible at this time? Yes, Che, you can apply for a visitor visa at this time. As I mentioned, they restarted processing for that the 1st of July. But just because you can apply, it does not mean that you can travel to Canada. You said that you need to visit Canada to attend an important family event. So maybe you qualify for one of the travel exemptions related to having a relative in Canada. But you'll have to check to see, their status as well as their relation and see if that could qualify you. Okay, we've got a ton of questions pouring in, but let's move on to our discussion about express entry. So express entry, we've got some updates here on express entry. Those of you who were watching express entry draws for the past 4 months, you may have been either frustrated or elated by how they were restricting draws to candidates in the Canadian experience class as well as those with provincial nominations. We saw all draws for 4 months restricted to people in those 2 classes of express entry. But as of last Wednesday, I believe it was July 8th, we had our first all-program draw take place in express entry since March 4th. So that means that federal skilled worker as well as federal skilled trades candidates were considered for that draw, CEC and PNP candidates as well. But the big news there was for FSW and FST candidates who had been waiting for them to restart all program draws. As we told people last week, we don't know if that means they're going to be doing all non-program specific draws from this point moving forward. It's possible that they might, oscillate back and forth, do some all programs, some CEC, if they still want to keep it keep some of the application processing for those who are in Canada already. But we're going to monitor that and we'll see, what happens with express entry. Application processing for express entry, as we mentioned, applications are still being processed, but you can expect huge delays across the board.
Can we take the express out? Let's call it entry.
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 It loses its flair there, eh? But especially if you are outside Canada, as we mentioned, even if you submitted a complete application prior to the travel restrictions going into place, simply because of the closure of VACs as well as the travel restrictions, we haven't seen a lot of applications approved through express entry for candidates residing outside Canada, and we don't really know if IRCC's resumed those application processing already or if it's coming in the near future. We'll keep monitoring, keep you guys posted.
Just want to obviously add to that a little bit about there's a lot of eager tradesmen out there, electricians, plumbers, bakers, cooks, awaiting the next federal skilled trades draw, specific draw, where they only choose candidates eligible for that stream. We've had no updates as to when, because if we go on previous history, it's been 2 per year, sometime around May or June, and then sometime around September, October. That is, the government didn't tell us. That's around the times they've done the previous draws, so 2 a year. So we're still waiting on the first one. Of this year, but we've no updates as to when that will be, but hopefully soon.
Yeah, and we moving to Canada, we have a legal source who we've been getting a bit of information and a few updates from related to IRCC's response to COVID. And they had suggested that IRCC is considering bringing back FST draws at some point over the summer. So it wasn't the strongest commitment that we've ever heard, but it does seem like there's a chance we might see something in the next couple of months.
And so I'll add one other thing, Dane. Obviously, we're talking about express entry, but one of the good things throughout COVID, obviously, Doherty Fultz Immigration, we deal a lot in the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, the OIMP, and they've been continuing to issue notifications of interest via express entry throughout COVID-19 since March, under the skilled trade stream, the human capital priority stream, the French-speaking skilled worker stream. So the good news as well, the PNP program seemed to be continuing to run.
Yeah, we've been seeing most PNPs continue. A number of provinces have introduced some changes. I think the biggest one is probably Alberta. Came out and said they're not issuing invitations to candidates who are residing outside Canada through the Alberta Express Entry stream at this time. But I think that's the only one that's explicitly said they're limiting it for in-country applicants. Otherwise, PNPs still seem to be operating.
Which is great.
Yeah, and you can always check out the latest information about PNPs, PNP draws and invitation rounds on the Moving to Canada website. I'm going to pull it up here under the immigration column. PNPs. We've got our PNP live tracker here. This is where we are constantly updating the results from the latest provincial nominee program draws. So you'll see we just announced an Alberta draw a couple of days ago.
And just in case the non-express entry people are worried, the PNPs are still accepting the non-express entry routes too. Or check the website to make sure which programs are accepting, but they're still accepting the non-express entry routes too.
Yeah, for sure. Got a couple questions here. Let me see if I can kill a few birds with one stone. I see Lavana asking, how do you see ITAs for all categories panning out? Will the score drop down? I've saw a bunch of people, Minal asking, what do you predict on EE scores? A lot of people asking that question. So I'm just going to come out and give our official statement in that regard. So first of all, as I mentioned, we don't know how IRCC is going to proceed with program-specific draws in the coming months. They might all of the draws moving forward might be all program draws, with the exception of a couple FST here and there, as we've seen through the history of the program.
PMP as well sometimes is separate prior to COVID-19.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. But they also, as I said, might shake it up a little bit to respond to the needs of the crisis and, privilege certain types of residency in order to make that easier on IRCC. As far as the CRS score cutoff, it was 478 on the July 8th draw last week. We don't know how that score is going to change moving forward. It's impacted by a number of variables, including how many people are entering the pool. And bear in mind, recently a lot of people haven't been able to get the documents they need to enter the pool, so there might be a little bit of a dip and then a fluctuation once certain.
I think we're going to see over the next month or two when when all language test centers, SALPIP and IELTS reopen, and the ECA organizations get back to like full 100% operations. We're definitely going to see a maybe one of the highest numbers of profiles going into the pool in such a short period of time, because obviously you can't submit a profile without valid language tests.
Right.
And in cases of FSW, you can't submit an FSW profile without an ECA. You can do it sometimes with a CEC or an FST or a PMP, but not with an FSW. Fed skilled worker, my apologies. So we're just, again, it's exactly what you said, Dave. I would say that there's so many variables, but one of the main variables will be the specific draws, what they choose to do going down that route.
Yeah, what we have seen in the past is that if IRCC maintains their bi-weekly draw schedule, so they do a draw once every 2 weeks, they issue about 3,900 invitations to apply, and they issue that to candidates in all programs. Typically, what we see is if they maintain that consistency, the CRS score cutoff drops a little bit between each draw. If they mess with that consistency, whether it's through pausing draws, doing program-specific draws, then that consistent, like slow drop tends to, go out the window. But again, we'll only really know as time goes by once we get more.
And anyone that's really disheartened with the 478, like as I said, just keep an eye on the draws, and that's all you can do. But don't be disheartened because we don't know what's to come.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions for Express Entry from our Facebook group, and then I see a bunch of questions coming in from audience members now. So I'm just going to start off with this question from Gurmanpreet. I'm going to field it to you, Anthony. After he graduated from university, he worked as a process engineering intern for 8 months in a company in Canada. The work was paid full-time, and he worked there while on the postgraduate work permit. Can he count this work experience to apply under CEC?
Okay, so a lot of different answers, obviously. So let's start off with process engineering. It sounds like it's skilled, but then when determining your NOC code, it's not the title. It'll be the duties and responsibilities that you carried out in your job. So when you get your employment letter, you take a look at the duties and responsibilities and try and match them to the most appropriate NOC code, NOC code. Okay. And then that is how you determine the NOC. Whatever one match the closest with your duties and responsibilities and the duties and responsibilities listed on the ESD website, that is your code. In regards to 8 months, now if it is skilled, yes, if it was skilled work and full time, or the equivalent in part time, and you were paid, then yes, it can be used towards making up that 1 year, which is the minimum requirement for Canadian experience class. So that's my answer, I believe. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And I'm not sure if you said this, but for CEC, that work experience, it does have to be obtained within the 3 previous years.
Yes, I did leave that out. The 1 year has to exactly what you said.
Yeah. But I know a question that we get a lot is, can I claim, multiple NOCs, or can there be a gap between my work experience for CEC? And the answer to that is yes, you can claim
100% yes.
But if you're a federal skilled worker candidate out there listening to this, the answer is no. You have to gain 1 year of full-time continuous skilled work experience in one NOC code in order to meet the minimum program requirements. After that, you can have other NOC codes and gaps in your employment, but you have to, for FSW, you've got to have that 1 year of full-time continuous.
1 year full-time.
Yeah. Great. And then Alexander wrote in on Facebook and asked about his sort of his processing timeline. So he had submitted his PR application in May of 2019, so everything went through, everything was good. Then in February, paid the right of permanent residence fee, and now hasn't heard about the final decision. Are there any actions that Alexander can take?
Okay. So I want to be careful on answering this question. In Alexander's case, based on his timeline, if he submitted his application in 2019, yes, he has definitely gone beyond the processing time, which would have been November, sometime in November.
Yeah.
Okay. Now remember, it's only 80% of all applications are processed within 6 months. However, we'll take in that he's gone over his December, January, February, and COVID didn't really hit until March. So this, to me, looking at this specific situation, it would be maybe yes, he would be in his best interest to apply for the GCMS notes. Now, the reason why I want to say very careful with this question. In Alexander's case, I agree. Apply for the GCMS notes. But if let's say your Express Entry application was submitted in January of this year, and we're now in July, June, so you would have maybe expected a decision in June. But you don't apply for your GSM notes because you've already been told that it's going to experience significant delays, and you'll just be wasting IRCC's time by sending in requests like that. You can, unless there's something else relating to your application that you're concerned about, but not the time frame.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. But could I ask you to clarify for people who are not aware, what are GCMS notes?
GCMS notes is GCMS. It's the name of the system, the management system where immigration officers enter their notes, basically where they process their application. So when an officer is processing their application, at each stage that they go through, whether it's eligibility or medical inadmissibility, all of the stages that one would go through for permanent residency, the officer is taking detailed notes at each phase. So by applying for the GCMS notes, you have the right to basically request a copy of those notes to see what is going on in your application. Does the officer have any concerns? And it will tell you basically what the officer's thinking is behind whatever's going on in your application.
Great, thank you.
Now, GCMS notes. It's how do you apply for them is called an access to information or privacy request. But in a lot of cases, especially when you're outside of Canada, you actually need a Canadian person, a Canadian citizen or permanent resident or a Canadian company to do so on your behalf. So you can visit Doherty Fultz Immigration for more information on that.
Perfect. And you could even book a consultation with Anthony if you have more specific questions than that.
Global Case Management System. There you go. It just popped into my head.
Glad you got there. I actually couldn't think of it either, but I wasn't going to admit it on air, and now I have. Okay, a couple of quick fire questions here. Alexander is asking about IELTS results. How will the government address people whose IELTS results are expiring? My understanding is that they haven't introduced any special measures to, accept IELTS or ECA results beyond their typical expiration date.
The lock-in date is the date you submit your application. Yeah. So from the date you submit your application, written the exam within the 2 years previous to submitting your permanent residency application. Okay. Yeah. On a separate note, for anyone that's watching who may be thinking of applying for citizenship, where you need to demonstrate your language proficiency, there is no expiry on IELTS or CELPIP. So you can use a CELPIP test that you did 5 years ago or your IELTS as your language proficiency proof for your citizenship application.
Great. Ruchita's asking us about SINP draws. I can confirm we've had some SINP draws happen. I know that I did one on our tracker not too long ago, so they are still happening, though I think there was a pause in there for a couple of months. Andrea's asking about tourists from Europe. Can they enter? They can't enter till July 31st. Is there any chance that this will change? Again, we don't know. You'll have to monitor to see if, as far as travel restrictions are concerned, we think Canada will likely either just fully extend them by another month, or they might do like what Europe has done, what the European Union has done, and create special measures. So residents of certain countries may be able to travel to Canada while others may not, depending on the infection rate in each of those countries. But we don't know. We don't know. We're
just to answer that question too as well. In the past, we've seen they'll typically address any changes just prior to whatever deadline is set. So we would expect something in the couple of days leading up to July 31st. That would be the time where we'd expect them to make a decision on whether to extend or to change or whatever they choose.
The last time we saw them make the decision on the day that it was set to expire.
Correct.
Yeah. So we really, we'll monitor our website because we'll put. I check that stuff so often. I will update it once we have information. I had a question here about LMIAs. Do you know, Anthony, I don't know the answer to this question. Are LMIAs for non-essential positions being processed at this time?
Okay, so all LMIAs are being processed. However, if the company who has given you the job offer, if the company is due to COVID-19, they're unable to, the worker would be unable to fulfill the duties and responsibilities of the position, they will refuse to process the LMIA. Okay, but luckily they're asking that actually before they process. They'll ask the employer that. So no, as long as you can apply for an LMIA in any occupation, based on you meet all the other criteria, as long as COVID-19 is not impacting the duties and responsibilities of the workers in the same occupation you're doing.
Great. So thank you for that, Anthony. I'm going to move us on to our next immigration program. We've got we're going to talk about IEC, International Experience Canada, including the Working Holiday Program. And then we're going to do a quick recap of family sponsorship and study permits, things we haven't been able to address so far. And that'll about do it for today. But I just want to give people who are watching a bit of a heads up about what's coming. So IEC, International Experience Canada, We have clarified. There was a lot of confusion at the beginning of the COVID travel restrictions about who could enter Canada and how. We have clarified those travel restrictions, so we've got a pretty much consistent message from the various Canadian government departments involved. So if you have been approved for your port of entry letter, so you received your port of entry letter, you can still travel to Canada, enter the country, and activate your IEC work permit, but you must have a job offer from a Canadian employer. You're going to have to show proof of that job offer at the airport and then again at the border. The more detail you can provide in your offer letter, the better. They're going to want to know that that employer is still up and running during COVID, that the job offer is still happening. But we've heard from our IEC community members that some people have gotten through just, showing an email from the employer guaranteeing that the job offer is happening. And then if you've already activated your IEC work permit, so let's say you came to Canada in February, activated your work permit, and then you left, can you still come back to Canada with that work permit? And the answer is yes, you can, provided that you left Canada temporarily. So in most cases, we haven't heard of people with already activated IEC work permits having much issue at the border. But in a few cases, we've heard if the person can't prove that they were out of Canada temporarily, then they're being refused entry. What does that mean? It means they might ask you to show you have some kind of existing connection to Canada, whether that is a job, an apartment with a lease, a family member, that sort of thing, something to prove that your leaving Canada was not temporary. Other IEC updates, as I mentioned before, there are no invitations being issued at this time. There are no applications being processed at this time. I saw someone just ask about IEC. So Marin was asking about IEC visas and processing. So everything is paused. We don't know when they're going to restart that. And we had someone else ask, do they have to meet the quotas for IEC by the end of the year? Will they have to restart the program and issue all the invitations to meet all the quotas for individual countries by the end of the year? There's no obligation that
No.
Canada will do that. We think there's a possibility they might just keep IEC paused for the rest of the season and restart it next year. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. But it's going to be responsive based on the progression of the health crisis, both in Canada and internationally. So best we can do is keep monitoring it. Another big update that's come out on IEC in the last week or two is on POE letter extensions. So if you received your POE letter and you hadn't yet been able to travel to Canada and activate it, and it's going to expire within the next 30 days, IEC put out a statement saying you can fill out our online web form and request an extension on your POE letter. I'm going to actually show you guys where you can do this. But the big update here was that you used to be able to request only one 90-day extension. As those extensions started approaching their expiration dates, IEC came out and said you can now request a second one. So you can now request two 90-day extensions. If you just look up the IEC COVID page on the IRCC website, you'll get all the details here. And they've got the instructions on how to extend your POE letter if it's going to expire. And you just do it selecting their web form, and you're going to select IEC from the drop-down menu. So it's pretty straightforward. Just go straight here and fill out the web form. Another question was about flag polling. There's still been no update on flag polling. The official IRCC statement in this regard is that flag polling is considered non-essential. This is if you're in Canada and you want to travel to a land port of entry to activate your work permit. That's still considered non-essential travel, and IRCC says that you should not do that at this time. I've got a couple questions. Let's let's do a couple of questions here from Fanella on Facebook. How is COVID-19 affecting the prospects of working holiday visas being granted this year? I see that Express Entry has recently reopened, has IEC. IEC, again, it has not reopened at this time. We don't know if or when it will. Medi asked us, does the age restriction for IEC, when does it apply? Is it from the time that you get your invitation and apply, or from the time that you create your profile? So for IEC, it's from the time until you submit your application. So let's say you submit your application, you're approved for you receive your POE letter that says you can travel to Canada. Then after you receive that POE letter, you age out. So let's say you turn 36 and you're from a country where the age limit's 35. That's okay as long as you have the POE letter. But if you create your profile and then you age out before you receive your invitation, your profile is going to become invalid. So it's from the time that you submit your application. And is the age restriction going to be extended because of COVID? Any thoughts on that?
Listen, I don't want to make any calls. I can't imagine so, but we don't.
No, it seems highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely.
One of the really complicating factors here is that IEC, all of the participating countries, their agreements are formed through bilateral arrangements with Canada, so it actually takes some pretty substantial negotiations to make any sort of temporary changes, because it's not just a decision that Canada would have to make on its own. It would have to be made in conjunction bilaterally with those other participating countries, which is not very hopeful. I'm sorry about that. And we had a couple of people asking, Faya and Pritesh, when can an IEC participant travel to Canada without having a job offer? Again, we also don't know. That's a temporary measure requiring IEC participants to have a job offer in order to travel to Canada, but we don't know how long that temporary measure will be in place for. Yeah, I see Denise says it's a good question. They should extend the age because it's not our fault to get 1 year older. I know. I understand that it's frustrating. One of the things we always tell people, though, is, we can never predict how immigration programs are going to change. If you're eligible and it's the thing that you want to do, applying in advance or applying when you're ready, as opposed to waiting, it can be the better decision, because sometimes they might change program requirements. There might be a global pandemic and everything will just, go a bit haywire for a little while. Ciara's asking about the job offer letter. Again, it doesn't have to be exceptionally detailed. We've seen people get through it with emails in the past, but you do want to have you do want to show that the job offer is from a company that's still operating. We recommend including your employer's contact information. They can call them if they need to, but it doesn't have to be like an official contract. However, more details are better than fewer. Okay. Oh, and we've got a good question to transition into our talk about family sponsorship. Do you have anything else you want to add on IEC here, Anthony?
On the IEC, no. I think you covered it in all very good detail. So no.
Thank you. I've been covering it very closely since the pandemic started. And now I lost the question. Come back here. Okay, Ignis is asking, are they still processing family class, so spousal sponsorship applications? So we're going to transition here. We're going to talk about family sponsorship. If you have a family-related question, now's a great time to ask it. Anthony, are they still processing family sponsorship applications right now?
Yes, they are. Again, like we've said multiple times today, it's been severely impacted by COVID-19. I would even argue maybe even more so because family sponsorship, whether it's in Canada class or it's overseas, is a paper-based application. So typically paper-based applications take longer than an online application. So yes, they are still processing, but you can expect significant delays.
Yeah, and we saw a report come out last week from CBC News stating that they actually hadn't started processing applications that had been submitted at some point in February yet for family sponsorship. So it's a pretty substantial delay that we're seeing with that program. Which,
well, the good thing about family sponsorship though is that's one of the principles of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act or it's one of the main principles is to reunite family members. So when it comes to reuniting family members, it's one of the highest objectives with IRCC.
yeah.
So,
Well, and it's quick history of family sponsorship over the last couple of years. It used to they had really high processing times a couple of years ago, and they've worked. The Trudeau government, the current Liberal government, worked pretty hard to get those processing times for family sponsorship applications down to 12 months approximately. Yeah. Obviously, it's always approximate, depends on the person. So they had gotten it to a pretty reasonable length of time. And so this is probably going to increase it, but thankfully they at least created that pretty expedited benchmark prior to COVID. So hopefully,
100%.
Long term it won't have too many lasting implications on processing. Okay, I don't see a ton of. Oh, here's a question from Kendra. I'm just starting my PR application to apply through CEC, and I have a girlfriend living back home that I would like to sponsor under common law. They plan on marrying in about a year or so, but they haven't yet. Do you know if it's better to mention her common law partner at the beginning of the process, or at the, I guess, later on in the process?
Okay, so going back to what I said earlier, so first of all, check of common law, because if you're currently in Canada and your partner is currently overseas, if there's been a significant gap, that could interfere where you would not meet the requirements. So that's number one. Look at the definition under IRCC on the website of what is a common law relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if it's very clear that you do not meet that definition, you do not need to include that person. Okay. But if it is clear or it's close to, that it is a common law relationship, then yes, you would include that person. So it all goes back to assessing whether or not you are common law by the definition of IRCC. As soon as you're married, then obviously if you were to get married today, next week, or next year, yes, you would need to include that person. Okay, right. Immediately. So it's the answer to that question is yes or no. Check to see if you meet the definition of common law couple.
And common law, there's a bit of complexity to that definition, but generally the foundation of it is 12 months of cohabitation in a genuine relationship.
You're allowed short periods of being away from one another. There's no definition on short. But you're due to obviously employment, because obviously a job can take someone away where they may not be able to, they have to go away for a couple of weeks for traveling. That's okay. But once you start creeping into the months, that's when you can start to experience problems.
Great. And I see Hugo has just dropped into the comments a link to the IRCC page on assessing a common law relationship. So check out that link. And Kendra, that was who asked the question. So Kendra, you can check out that link. It might give you a bit. So
I just want to say, Kendra, please be very diligent on, don't, if you do meet the definition, include your partner, and if you don't, you don't need to, but you need to make sure that you get it right, as in, meet the definition.
Great.
Okay.
So we're gonna move on to the last topic we're covering here, which is students and study permits. So Anthony, there has been an update on there have been a few updates for students. We covered the travel restriction at the beginning. If you were approved for a study permit, or if you already had your study permit prior to March 18th, you are exempt from travel restrictions. You can still travel to Canada at this time. But outside of that, there have been a couple of other study-related updates. One of the big ones was related to post-graduation work permits. A lot of international students come to Canada knowing that at the end of their period of study, they can apply for this post-graduation work permit. It's a great initiative by the Canadian government. It gives international students the ability to stay in the country and work for, depending on the type of permit they get, up to 3 years after they graduate, gain that valuable Canadian work experience, and for many people apply for PR after that. Can you talk us through what has changed about post-graduation work permit eligibility here during COVID times?
So, because a lot of people who have been issued study permit approvals, or been issued their study permits, regardless of March 18th, they will be allowed to study from home in the country of residence. They'll be able to attend classes online. So normally we get a lot of concerned students because previously online studies did not count towards postgraduate work permit but because of COVID-19, the Canadian government's allowing people who are at home, unable to travel to Canada, either due to restrictions or other COVID-19 reasons, the ability to study online with the Canadian university, as long as either have either been approved for a study permit or they have a study permit. Okay. Now, again, because these people are overseas, that what they're allowing is as long as you can study 50% of your course online from overseas, and it will not impact your eligibility for a postgraduate work permit.
Great. Yeah, it's a pretty substantial change from what we've seen in the past. Now, what if a person hasn't been approved for their study permit yet?
Do you know, we're still waiting on an answer on that one, because if you look around the world right now, the processing times for study permits in all the visa offices it's huge. Like some of them are 50 days, 80 days, and a couple of them over 100. So it's unrealistic that these people will be able to return. I haven't seen any updates on those particular individuals who have not been approved or have not been study permit. But as soon as I do, or we can update you, and you can put it on your website.
Great. Yeah, and I know when we were talking earlier, Anthony, you let me know that the POE letter for a student now will authorize that person to study online.
Correct.
From outside
Yes.
Canada.
Yes. So even if you've not sent say you're from a TRV required country, usually you would send off your passport and you would receive your POE letter back with your passport or with your visa. So now you don't even need to have the visa. You just need that letter that you receive in your MyCSE account, your POE letter or your study permit approval, and that allows you to study online with your Canadian university or college.
Right. And I know, so I'm responding to a question we had from Eduardo on Facebook here. He asked, I'm an international student that applied for a study permit back in April. My semester starts in September. So how possible would it be for me to get my permit before my semester starts? And I think you just gave a pretty good answer here.
They're going to, unless they already have done so, and obviously we'll update that if they've done so, but right now, for the people who do not have an approval or a study permit who are overseas, we don't have an update for them as of yet. But we assume the Canadian government must address it because we're talking tens of thousands of people.
Great. And just a question from Facebook I saw pop in here, a program maybe relating to family sponsorship. Carolyn's asking about the parent and grandparent sponsorship program. And I have a little bit of information in that regard. Carolyn, we have a trusted legal source who we've been getting some information about decision-making at IRCC. And they said that IRCC still wants to do a parent and grandparent intake at some point in 2020. They're still trying to do that, but there's no confirmation as to when it will happen or what. I believe they don't know what the process will be like at this point either. The parent and grandparent program, it's been I think I can just say it's been a bit of a mess for the past few
That's
years.
Fair. That's fair.
Sorry, IRCC, but it's true. So it's sort of a non-update, but at least you know that they are trying to do it. Stay tuned to our website. We'll post an update if more information becomes available. And another question came in from Dana on our Facebook page. In order for me to be eligible for a postgraduate work permit, do I need to study in Canada for 1 year, or can it be only 8 months?
Okay, so two answers to this question. So the answer is 8 months. The course from beginning to completion must be 8 months or more. Okay, now what I would highly advise you to do is, before you enroll in the course, go on the IRCC website to make sure that the program or school that you're applying to is eligible for a postgraduate work permit, because there is many that are not. And it's very cruel sometimes when people don't check this because they didn't know they should have checked it, is they'll spend 8,000, 9,000 on a, or even more, on a 1 year or 2 year diploma, only to find out at the end of that they were never eligible in the first place to get a postgraduate work permit. So check to make sure the program of the school is eligible for the PGWP, postgraduate work permit. And yes, the correct answer is 8 months. Anything below 8 months is not eligible for a postgraduate work permit.
Okay, great. And 8 months, I don't know exactly how semesters work in other countries, but 8 months is usually 2 semesters. So it's sort of 8 months is like 1 year of full-time study in Canada, which is why you might hear people saying you need to study for 1 year.
Well, going back on what you said either as well, Dane, earlier on about how good the postgraduate work permit program is, allowing the international graduates to gain valuable Canadian work experience, and then create a pathway to permanent residency. The problem is when you come in and do a course under a course under 1 year. Say it is 8 months and you get a postgraduate work permit. Well, your postgraduate work permit is only going to be issued for 8 months. Okay, so it's not going to give you the necessary time to gain that. So we would always recommend that, if you're going to do a diploma and you're thinking about your future, make sure that the diploma is at least 1 year or more.
Yeah, well, and if you're planning on if your goal is to immigrate to Canada permanently, don't be wishy-washy about your plans.
2 years. 2 years. 1 study permit completed, you've completed your education. If it's postgraduate work permit meets the eligibility, you will be issued a postgraduate work permit for the same duration. And that's all the way until you get to 2 years. Once you do 2 years or more and you complete your program, you graduate from your program, you're eligible for a 3-year postgraduate work permit. So I agree 100% what you're saying, Dane, because that 3 years is enough time to create your pathway towards Canadian Experience Class or whatever PR route you're choosing.
And it's the same thing we tell anyone who's coming on any sort of temporary work permit. So IEC participants, people coming on LMIA-based work permits, plan ahead. If you understand the PR requirements, you're going to be able to make much smarter decisions and make your permanent residency process a lot easier in the long run. And on that note, so I think we've gone through most of the we have not gone through most of the questions. We've gone through as many of the questions as we can. So we're going to start wrapping up. I did see a quick one I can answer. Avani asked us, when will the Ontario Rural Program start? So I believe you're referring to the Ontario Regional Immigration Pilot, and it actually opened to applications last week. I think it was July 9th. It opened. The details are on our website, so you can check that out there. And we've got a question. I'll try to answer one more question here. I see coming in from Ryan. I'm currently stuck in Canada. I've been here for 122 days waiting for my PR to be granted. The 18-month wait time for MPNP finished in April. Do we have an estimate of when immigration will be active again? I've been told I can't leave Canada until it's through. So... Ryan, I'll share my 2 cents, and maybe you have more information too, Anthony. But immigration is active. PR applications, especially for people inside Canada, are still being processed. So we are experiencing a lot of delays, but things are still moving. So there's a chance you could have some movement on your PR application at any given time. But unfortunately, we're experiencing some unprecedented delays in immigration. Do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I'd agree. I'm good with that. That's good.
Yeah, wish we had better news for you. Um, so I think we're gonna close off here in just a moment. I did want to take a sec to plug you, Anthony. So
It's very nice of you, Dan.
Anthony Doherty, he is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, one of the partners at Doherty Fultz Immigration. I'm pulling up their page here on the Moving to Canada website. So you can read all about Doherty Fultz on our website, the process for booking a consultation, as well as the many, many services that Anthony and Doherty Fultz offer. So a ton of different services offered here: one-on-one consultations, express entry. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. You guys are based in Ontario, so experts in the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, family sponsorship, study permits, application reviews, LMIAs, work permits, PR card renewals, citizenship card renewals, replacements of COPRs, and criminal rehabilitation and temporary resident permits. It's, I mean, you guys cover it all. So really, if any of you guys watching, you have hyper-specific questions, you want guidance beyond, your one-line question that you could ask in this live stream, book a consultation with Anthony or with someone else at Doherty Fultz, and they will be able to share their expertise with you. Now, I know, Anthony, one of the specialties that you guys offer at Doherty Fultz is an express entry review. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously, COVID-19, a lot of people are out of work, and times are hard. People, are relying on CERB and other because they don't have employment. So the good thing about the review is that instead of seeking representation, which can cost, anywhere from $1,000 to, $4,000, no one has that money. So what we offer express entry review service to candidates, applicants who've received an invitation to apply through any of the programs, the 4 programs: Federal Skilled Trades, Federal Skilled Worker, Canadian Experience Class, and the Provincial Nominee Program. So what we do is, instead of charging them thousands of dollars for representation, which no one has, is we do a complete review of their application. Their invitation, they gather fill out the necessary fields in their application. Then they would contact us, and within the 3 to 5 business days, we will basically go into your account. We will first assess eligibility to make sure that you meet all the eligibility requirements of the program you've been invited to apply under. Then we will do an assessment on the CRS points to make sure that you have accounted for and proved and demonstrated that you have every point that you received when you received your invitation to apply, making sure that you remain above that cutoff score, whatever that score would be. And finally, then we will look at every document to make sure that it meets the completeness, meets the mandatory requirement and the completeness requirements of IRCC, like the employment letter. That's usually probably one of the most common reasons for application refusals or incomplete applications would be the employment letter or getting the NOC code wrong. So we take a look at your NOC code to make sure that your letter of employment, that you've selected the right NOC code based on that, and just a complete thorough check of your application. After we've done our review, which is included in the price, we'll set up a 1 hour, usually takes 1 hour. We will sit down and we will share our screen with you, and we'll go through piece by piece all of our findings in your application, and we'll advise the changes that need to be made. Some mandatory, most of them will be mandatory changes, and that way then you haven't paid, at the end of it, you haven't paid thousands of dollars for representation, but you've had a professional review your application, because a lot of people are, they're always like, oh, I'm not sure, I'm worried. But you've got that peace of mind that a professional has looked at your application and before you submit.
Yeah.
So we offer that service, and it's available on our website. And yeah.
And look, like we here at Moving to Canada, we're strong advocates of empowering people to handle their immigration processes on their own. A lot of the time, you can do research, you can figure things out, you can do applications on your own. But there are situations in which it does really make sense to work with a consultant. And having a PR application review completed by a professional, it can be a really smart idea, because with these PR applications with Express Entry, just a single missing document, or missing one piece of information on one work reference letter, that can be...
You upload your police certificate in black and white. A simple thing like that can have your application cancelled.
Yeah. So
God, sorry to interrupt.
Oh yeah, no worries. I was just reiterating that if you've got the finances, it's a high stakes application. It's your permanent resident status. So it can be worth the investment to have an expert like you would look at it.
I would argue it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You don't, and I'm all for empowering that too. You don't necessarily need representation if you're, but this gives you the best of both worlds, where it's affordable and you have that peace of mind.
For sure. So thank you for sharing a bit of information about that, Anthony.
No problem.
One other thing I wanted to point out was related to the Moving to Canada website. So we also have an account section on our website. You can register for a Moving to Canada account using there's a link right in the description of this video. You'll also see it on the Moving to Canada website. Here, let me see if I can pull that up for a second. So this is a free account that you can create that will give you access to a bunch of freebies we've got for our account holders. So our Getting Started guide, we've got free CV templates and resume templates, cover letter templates for applying for jobs in Canada as well. We've got some email education roadmaps we've created. So we've got our free Express Entry roadmap. It gives you 7 lessons by email that'll teach you everything you need to know about Express Entry to get started on the process. And all you have to do is complete this quick little sign up form, just name, email, password, and you get access to all of that. So I encourage you to click that link in the description of the video, or head over to our website and create your account to take advantage of all of that. I think that's everything we wanted to get through today. So thank you to everybody who's tuned in, everybody who's asked questions. I apologize that we couldn't get through all of your questions, but there's just tons and tons of stuff that's come through. We did our best to answer as many as we could. And big thank you, of course, to you, Anthony, for joining us again. It's always a pleasure talking immigration with you. And I'm glad that we're able to bring some important updates and information to our audience.
Well, I just want to take the moment to again thank all the viewers for today. And as I said, we couldn't get through all your questions. And I'd like to thank yourself, Dane, and Moving to Canada for having us on today.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Stay tuned to our website. The COVID situation is still evolving. There will be more changes. We will update them on our COVID newsfeed if and when they become available. And if there are any more substantial changes, we'll be going live again to answer more of your questions. I always forget how to end the live stream. Give me a second. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you again. See you next time.